Jeff Johns and David Goyer were writing JSA, that they wrote an excellent retcon. And spoilers for this, but it was revealed that Dove, aka Dawn Granger, was still alive. She had been imprisoned by Mordru since the events of Armageddon 2001. Mordru had used his magic to make it appear that Monarch had killed Dove, and not only that, he also used his magic to make it appear to Hawk that the Monarch was an older version of Hawk. And Mordru was doing this all in an effort to gain control over not only the two agents of law or of order and chaos, but he was also trying to gain greater control over the powers of order and chaos. And so what Johns and Goyer did was they retconned things such that nobody would ever really know who the original Monarch was. So there's now this great mystery. But the tragedy of Hank's descent into a second Monarch was still there. But going back to 1991, DC figured the only way to try to make something positive of Armageddon 2001 was to release a couple of spin-off series that will both be 4 issues in length. And the first spin-off 4-parter was called Armageddon Alien Agenda. It involved some time hopping, some aliens. I don't remember much about it. One thing I remember is that I finished reading it and saying, well, there's an hour of my life I'm never going to get back. The 2 other things that I took out of it, though, were that Hank Hall was a very bad guy, and Captain Atom was a really good guy. Clearly, that wasn't enough for fans. So, in producing a second miniseries, DC decided to take a concept, a group of characters off the shelf, a group of characters that at one time DC wanted to keep on the shelf forever, hoping that by bringing them back it would engender such goodwill that people would say, oh, DC, you're forgiven, all is well, good job. I say it largely worked. And again, this was a miniseries that was originally never slated to happen. It was only because of the whole fiasco of the original Armageddon series. In Armageddon Inferno, a group of demons were making their way to the Earth. A collection of heroes from the DCU, as well as Wave Rider, attempted to stop the demons from entering Earth. And basically, in the end, what happened was that a breach was opened such that these demons were sent into limbo, thus allowing Alan Scott and the other members of the JSA to be swapped out and to come back to our plane of existence. Great cover by Jerry Ordway on issue number 4 of Inferno. Totally spoiled the ending of the miniseries, but nobody really cared. One, it was some great artwork by Ordway, and 2, what fans really enjoyed was seeing the final page where Alan, Jay Garrick, other members of the JSA were happily reunited with Superman, Batman, members of the Justice League. So there it was. The JSA was back. And this started an unfortunately short-lived JSA reunion. Part 1 of not the reunion, but the JSA revival was the publication of a 10-part miniseries, or maxi-series, I should say, called Justice Society of America. And it was a story which took place during the 1950s, which was great because at this point, there weren't a whole lot of stories that had been told about the JSA in the 1950s. All the fans really knew was that there were the McCarthy witch hunts of the 50s, which had forced the JSA to go into self-imposed exile. But now here was a story featuring the JSA taking place during peacetime, helping to fill in that gap. And so the success of that 10-parter led DC to greenlight Volume 1 of Justice Society of America by Len Strazewski and Mike Parobeck. And that may seem odd to you, Volume 1 of Justice Society of America, but you have to consider, in the Golden Age and the Bronze Age, the JSA did not have a self-titled book. Rather, they appeared in All-Star Comics, the revival of All-Star Comics, as well as All-Star Squadron and Infinity Inc. But here, in 1991/1992, the JSA was getting its own book. And in terms of the visual depiction of the JSA, in terms of the artwork, it was ahead of its time, in that late Mike Parobeck's art style was very cartoony. It was a simplified design, and it wasn't a style of art that would really catch on until Bruce Timm came along and became the principal artist for things like Batman the Animated Series, the Superman series, Justice League Unlimited. But the story certainly seemed endearing. And issue 1 was great because issue 1 took place in the present day, and the JSA was having a hero's welcome after having spent so long in limbo. And after a public recognition ceremony, the scene shifted to a diner where old friends Alan Scott and Jay Garrick were talking about how, since their return from limbo, they could feel the different magics and other supernatural phenomena that had kept them young and vital for so many years was wearing off. And so it was only a matter of time before they would slow down and have to end their superhero careers once and for all. But then the crime broke out, and as they transitioned into their superhero identities of Flash and Green Lantern, Jay Garrick asked rhetorically, "Retirement?" To which Alan Scott replied with an oh so 90s response, "Not." And in fact, Alan did it twice for good measure in issue number 1. This would have been a really interesting story, showing these heroes who started out in the 1940s, spending time in limbo and then coming back, showing how they would deal with resuming their careers and fighting a new brand of evil in the present day. Unfortunately, the series was canceled after, I want to say, issue number 10, and I don't know that all 10 issues even saw the light of day. Writer Len Strazewski was furious about the book's cancellation, and he pointed the blame squarely on the shoulders of editor Mike Carlin. In Strazewski's words, or words to that effect, Mike Carlin had no interest in stories about superheroes who were senior citizens. And so, once again, the JSA found themselves without a book. However, the JSAers were still free to pop up in other books. I know that in, was it issue number 50 of Justice League Europe, Alan Scott and Jay Garrick actually joined the JLE on an adventure. And that actually ended with the JLE renaming itself the Justice League International. So even though the JSA wasn't going to be active as its own unit, the members of the JSA were invited to become reserves at Justice League. I recall the term Justice League All-Star Reserves being used for the JSAers. So again, a bitter pill to swallow for older fans, for JSA fans in general. But given that he was Green Lantern, Alan Scott actually reaped the benefits of there being 3 books that were titled Green Lantern that were in publication. There was, of course, the main Green Lantern title. There was Green Lantern Mosaic, which told of John Stewart's mission in securing the peace on the Mosaic world, as a way of atoning for his brash ego and actions which had led to the destruction of the planet Xanshi. And then there was Green Lantern Corps Quarterly, an anthology book which served to further expand upon the general history of the Green Lantern mythology. And as it turned out, Alan Scott would actually feature quite prominently in GLC Quarterly. Of course, because it was a quarterly book, it only came out 4 times a year. But still, fans loved seeing Alan Scott appearing in this title and getting his own story in each issue. And it was in the pages of GLC Quarterly that Alan would undergo a rather fascinating transformation. It was issue number 7. And issue number 7 started with the story that actually restored the Starheart story written by Daniel O'Neil and confirmed by Roy Thomas in post-crisis history, as it was shown that eons ago, the Guardians of the Universe had collected all the wild, random, chaotic magic in the universe, coalesced it, condensed it in the heart of a star, shot it to the farthest outreaches of the universe. And over time, a piece of the Starheart would come to Earth in the form of a glowing green meteor that would eventually become Alan Scott's Green Lantern Power Battery. The extension here, though, was that as the Starheart came to Earth, it also absorbed the essence of Yalen Gur. So a really neat way of merging both the Starheart origin story as well as the Yalen Gur storyline. One might suppose then that when the Lantern spoke to Alan Scott, it was actually Gur's voice that was acting as a mouthpiece, so to speak. Perhaps not just for Gur, but also for the Starheart itself. But issue number 7 of GLCQ got even more interesting as readers saw Alan's children, Jenny Lynn and Todd, aka Jade and Obsidian, pay a visit to their father and stepmother. And when they came to the door was answered by a rather young man, a man who appeared to be 25, give or take a couple of years. And it turned out that this young man was Alan Scott himself. And after welcoming his children in, Alan explained that something happened. His lantern went active, and he was transformed into a young 20-something-year-old again, and he had no idea why this happened. Well, Alan was about to get an answer pretty soon, as there was another knock on the door, and this visitor was a Green Lantern by the name of Torquemada. Now, in addition to being a Green Lantern, Torquemada was really interesting because he was a magic wielder. So, interesting that the Guardians would allow for a ring to select a magic wielder as a member of the GLC. But clearly the Guardians in the ring looked past the fact that Torquemada was a magic wielder and saw that he was capable of overcoming great fear. and would still be a very worthy member of the Green Lantern